Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll let a couple more people trickle in, and then I'll hand it over to Andrea. Looks like we've got everybody in from the waiting room, so let's kick it off.
Okay, so it's lovely to see everybody. There's some familiar faces that I can see. So hello to those people that already know me. So hello everyone and welcome. I'm Andrea, Director of Operations of Eco-Judaism. And for those of you new to the Eco-Judaism project, I'd like to tell you a little bit about who we are. So Eco-Judaism, which was previously Eco-Synagogue, established as a charity at the end of last year. We represent the UK Jewish community's response to the climate crisis, and our mission is to take our community, locally and nationally, on a journey from Bal Tashchit, don't waste and don't destroy, to Tikkun Olam, saving our planet for future generations. We do this by providing resources and support to synagogues and to organizations. Our trustees currently are rabbis representing the Orthodox, Reform, Liberal, Masorti, S&P, Sephardi communities. And there are many ways, as some of you will already know, that we can work together, whether you're a synagogue, an organization, or a community. And please look at the website, ecojudaism.org.uk, and be in touch. Educating ourselves on the issues surrounding the climate crisis is at the core of what we do. And this is why we are delighted that the Clean Air Wins campaign is here to help us to do this. You will hear in this presentation, amongst other things, about the planned ULEZ extension. And we know that this is a contentious issue in the Jewish community in London. We support and we consider critical to our care for the earth that we do our utmost to reduce air pollution. Our scriptures tell us that every breath that we take is potentially an act of praise. And thus we do have a duty to keep the air around us that we breathe as pure as possible for future generations. We recognize that one of the ways to help in this endeavor is through the creation of ultra-low emission zones so that motor vehicles contribute as little as possible, given today's technology, to air pollution. Now, as you know, the Mayor of London proposes to extend the ULEZ that's currently in central London to outer suburbs. And this, we know, will have a substantial effect on the majority of the Jewish population of London and the cost potentially of them coming to their synagogues and community centres. So whilst Eco-Judaism supports the principle of ULEZ extension due to its benefits to cleaning the air that we breathe, we do urge policymakers to make sure that it is accompanied by improvements to public transport routes and frequency, collective transport options such as dial-a-ride, facilities for charging electric vehicles in public places, and help for those who cannot afford to replace an old non-compliant vehicle to be able to easily reach community and shopping facilities. We also know that many older members of our synagogues depend on the Jewish community to reduce isolation and enhance meaning in life, and we need to support their transport needs whilst we clean and preserve the environment. This presentation will show you ways of engaging and supporting the ULEZ expansion. This is not a recommendation from us. This information is provided for you to make an informed and individual decision as to whether or not you want to engage on a personal level. There's the opportunity for questions after the presentation, and I'm very happy to introduce our trustee and founder, Rabbi Jonathan Wittenberg, who is also with us, who will speak at the end. So without further ado from me, we are delighted to be joined this evening by Hester Liza from the Clean Air Wins campaign. The campaign launched in April this year and aims to raise awareness and build grassroots support for clean air policies in London. And we also have her colleagues, Maddie and Naomi, on the call. So thank you very much, Hester.
Hello, good evening, and thank you so much for having us. We're really thrilled to get to come talk to all of you this evening, and for anybody watching the recording, a special hello to you as well. As Andrea mentioned, we've got a presentation fee this evening, and then I'm really happy to answer any questions at the end. But without further ado, I'll go ahead and start sharing my screen, and we'll kick things off. So as Andrea said, we are the Clean Air Wins campaign. We launched earlier this year, and we're really proud to be supported by C40 Cities and the UK Healthy Air Coalition. As Andrea mentioned, the point of our campaign is to send the message loud and clear that Londoners want clean air, and we want it now. We think that breathing clean air is a human right. We wouldn't drink dirty water, so why are we having to deal with toxic air? And we're trying to kind of show support for action being taken on this really important issue. Sounds like many of you already know a lot about air pollution, which is amazing, but we wanted to kind of do a little bit of an air pollution 101 for those of you slightly less familiar. It just refers to contamination of the air with really harmful gases and particulates. The main pollutants that are harmful for human health are particulate matter, aka PM 2.5, and nitrogen dioxide. You can see here that these are really, really tiny particles, and the majority of them are polluted through human activities like burning fossil fuels, vehicle exhaust fumes, and emissions from different industries like agriculture. So we would love to get a quick sense in the chat if people want to drop in, how bad do you think air pollution is in your area? It doesn't have to be super scientific. If you just kind of want to put a sense check in the chat, that would be really great for us to kind of get a sense of where people think it is right now. I know we have this website that we'll share with people at the end where you can check air pollution in your area. And I will say that for me individually, I was very shocked. I live near a big green space, so I thought that, oh, it can't be that bad near me. And I was shocked to hear that I was in the 87th percentile of across the country, which really surprised me. Okay, so we're seeing some in the chat. Somebody from Leeds, hello, thrilled to have you here. So yeah, some people saying they think it's probably not too bad. Some people who've already looked it up know that it is quite bad. So I think the thing that's the bad news is that all across London, air pollution levels exceed the World Health Organization guidelines, and in some cases even have illegal levels of air. The UK government set standards, and some neighborhoods across London actually have worse air pollution than is legal. And so we really do encourage everybody to check the air pollution outside your house, across your neighborhood. So it would be great if you use that addresspollution.org to check it out. Unfortunately, some of the stats can be quite shocking because it's really harmful to think that some neighborhoods have illegal levels of air pollution. So because of that, it's really a public health emergency across London. It affects every single borough, not just in central London, but also in outer London. And there's really no safe level of air pollution for human health. It's an invisible killer that affects people from their head to the toes. And unfortunately contributes to lifelong illnesses and in fact, thousands of premature deaths every year in London. It affects everybody. Of course, we're all breathing the same air, but older people, children, and people of color and people living in poverty are often hit the hardest. And in fact, air pollution is the world's largest single environmental health risk. So it's a really big problem, which is why we started this campaign. We wanted to show you a little bit about some of the health impacts specifically. I think some of them will be more obvious, kind of respiratory diseases like asthma, but it really does kind of affect all different parts of the body. So it includes things like lung cancer. I think I saw a stat the other week that about 1 in 10 cases, air pollution has kind of been contributing to that. Things like heart disease, but also things like dementia, strokes, even mental health, things like kidney and bladder cancer. And then something that I didn't know until quite recently was about the reduced fertility, low birth weight, and infant health problems. So it's something that really affects people from the start of their lives to the end of their lives. And the Imperial College have done a really great review of all of the different studies that have been done on this. So if anybody's interested in kind of getting more of the information on the different health impacts and how those studies have been done, there's a link in here that we'd be happy to share afterwards so you can go kind of review all of the data yourself. Because of all of those different ways that air pollution impacts human health, if we were to take action on air pollution, it's expected that it could save the NHS and the social care system around £5 billion over the next 30 years. And it would do that by preventing more than 1 million air pollution related hospital admissions over the next 30 years. So if we're able to take action on this, it would really have a really big impact across the city. So in terms of where air pollution is coming from, we mentioned at the beginning some of the it's mostly from human activity. But specifically, nearly half of London's nitrogen dioxide at the road is caused by road vehicles. So nearly 50%, and then over 30% of PM 2.5 also comes from road vehicles. And some of that's coming from tire and brake wear. So it's really this is a key area where we need to tackle air pollution. There are obviously other things as well, but given the percentages, road transport is the one that we're focusing on at the moment as being one of the biggest sources of air pollution. And because of that, it's not just impacting human health, but also obviously harming the planet. I know that's something that this group really cares about. And obviously, given the fact that we're facing a climate crisis and the fact that road traffic accounts for a significant amount of London's greenhouse gas emissions, as well as air pollution, it's something that we feel is really important. We had a really great thread the other week on our Instagram about World Bee Day, because air pollution also impacts ecosystems and wildlife, the quality of soil and water. And it never would have occurred to me until our social media team put together this thing about bees, just how much it impacts all different aspects of the ecosystem. So it's not just human health, it's really harming the planet as well in different ways. And something else that we're really keeping top of mind is that toxic air is a social justice issue. As we mentioned, obviously it affects all of us, but older people, children, people of color, and people living in poverty are hit the hardest. Some of that is because of long-standing inequalities in our society, meaning that you're more likely to live in areas with the worst pollution if you're from one of those groups. But it's also worth noting that nearly half of all households in London don't even own a car, and yet they suffer poor air because of road vehicles. Only 5% of the lowest income Londoners own a car, and yet they're 10% more likely to suffer from toxic air. So we think it's really unfair and unjust that the people who've done the least to cause this air pollution often face the worst air quality. And that's one of the reasons that we're so passionate about taking action on this issue, because we really do think it is a matter of justice. So with that, we kind of want to have a little positive moment thinking about what would happen if we were able to kind of take action on this. And it's that we all want to breathe cleaner air. We all deserve a city where children can walk and cycle to school safely, people can spend time outdoors without worrying about health impacts, and that communities have quality and affordable access to green public transport. We know that any small changes that we make now will have an impact for decades to come. We're all breathing this air for the rest of our lives, whether we like it or not. So we want to make sure that it's the best air that we can breathe. So we've got a couple of tips from our partners over at Asthma and Lung UK. They're also part of the Healthy Air Coalition for some of the things that you can do to reduce your own exposure to air pollution. One of the things that's worth noting, I know just yesterday there was a warning for high air pollution in London. It's worth knowing that on hot sunny days, air pollution is worse. So every day you can check the air pollution in your neighborhood, and you can also sign up for air pollution alerts using DEFRA. So on days that have really high air pollution, if you're able to, you can choose to limit your time outside or limit outdoor exercise so you can avoid breathing too much polluted air. And if you do need to go out, we'd recommend going out earlier in the day because air quality tends to be better earlier in the day. Something that you can also do is if you are going out and about, kind of trying to limit your time on busy roads, anytime you can, going on quieter back streets. But it's also worth noting that even if you're on a busy road, if you can walk on the inside of the pavement, so the side further away from the road, air pollution is lower the further away you are from traffic. Something that I feel like doesn't get talked about enough is that one of the most polluted places in London is actually in the inside of your car, especially if you have your windows open and you're driving in slow moving traffic. So if you're driving in traffic like that, definitely make sure to keep your windows closed as you drive along. Asthma and Lung UK also have some great tips on what we can all do to be lowering the amount that we pollute in terms of air pollution. So we can all try and help the quality of the air we breathe by doing these things. Obviously, they're not all going to be possible every day, but when you can, using public transport instead of driving, or in fact, walking or cycling when doing a really short trip, or doing things like car sharing, anything that kind of helps keep the highest polluting vehicles off the roads. Something that's really important is to not idle while stationary if you're driving. Sometimes you'll see people kind of with their engines on outside of school, and it's insane how much and one car can pollute while idling just in a couple of minutes. So make sure to turn your engine off. If you're pulled in somewhere, you can always just turn it back on when you're ready to go. Because of PM 2.5, something that's also really important is to get your car serviced regularly to make sure that the tires are in good condition, because that's one of the main ways that PM 2.5 comes into the world. And something that surprised me until recently is avoiding using wood-burning stoves or other fossil fuels for heating. The other fossil fuels for heating kind of makes sense, but I didn't realize how much air pollution can come from a wood-burning stove. So if you don't need to use one, we definitely recommend trying to minimize it. And if you do have one, you can get it checked to see how much it's causing pollution. So with that, I'll pass it over to my colleague, Maddie, who's going to talk a bit more about some of the bigger picture policies. We've just talked about stuff that you can do yourself in your day-to-day life, but obviously this needs to happen on a much bigger scale. We know that Clean Air Day is tomorrow, so it's a really timely time to be talking about all of this. But it's not just one day that we want to be taking these actions, it's for the long haul. So Maddie, I'll kick it over to you to take us into some of the policies.
Thanks so much. Yeah, exactly as Hester was saying, it's brilliant to be taking individual action to keep yourself safe and to keep others around you safe, but really thinking about what we can do collectively in our city and in local regional politics is really important. So these are just a few of the policies that we support in the campaign. First and foremost among them, removing the most polluting vehicles from the roads. So we think it's a realistic and reasonable get. Improving public transport services, putting pressure on national and local governments to do so, promoting active travel options for all types of people, all different abilities, including walking and cycling, just trying to make our cities much easier to navigate and more pleasant for everyone. Protecting green spaces in the city, and one that's also really important but often underlooked is making sure that we have the most up-to-date information regarding air quality so that people are aware, especially as with yesterday, of when there are maybe episodes of particularly high air pollution so they can keep themselves safe. But for the next few slides, I'll just be sort of running you through some of the statistics behind expanding the ultra low emission zone, because this is one of the policies that's really on the table right now that we think has the potential to build a lot of really good momentum around future clean air policies. And we think there's a bit of miscommunication around the policy, which is, I think, leading to a little bit of strife around clean air in general, which I think most people are behind. I'll just be running through some of those. So just to provide a little bit of background on what is the ultra low emission zone, it's a policy aimed at reducing air pollution by charging high polluting vehicles a daily fee to drive inside the zone. So you may well be aware of the zones that already exist in inner and central London. What you may not know is that ULEZ was first announced by Boris Johnson in 2013 in order to tackle the illegal pollution levels across London. But it was introduced by Mayor Khan in 2019 and then expanded to a wider portion of London in 2021 and is set to expand to include all of London on August 29th, which is coming up in a couple of months. So just to outline why this is a policy that has had an impact so far and is quite common sense, the existing ULEZ has helped to reduce roadside nitrogen dioxide by, compared to if it weren't in place, by 46% in central London and 21% in inner London. Obviously, it has slightly decreasing dividends as you move further outside of London, but there are also more people living on the outskirts of London and more older people living on the outskirts of London. So that's why it's really important that this policy take effect across across London, and also people are, traveling all in and around London. So it really matters that everywhere is reducing pollution because, of course, air travels across the city. On top of that, each day, 74,000 fewer polluting vehicles have been seen driving in the existing ULEZ zone, which is a cut of 60%, which is huge since its expansion in October 2021. And an Imperial College study estimated that childhood asthma admissions due to air pollution in London have reduced by 30% since 2016. So this is already making a really big impact on public health, especially for the youngest Londoners. Hospital admissions. Expanding the ULEZ will bring cleaner air to 5 million Londoners living in outer London, and will ensure that many more live in areas who meet the WHO guidelines for air quality. And it'll of course reduce the number of cars that aren't meeting those like clean standards, and including vans and everyday private vehicles. It's projected to lead to 146,000 fewer car trips per day, so a net decrease in like in trips using cars, which actually there's a lot of statistics about out there about how a lot of journeys in London can be made in 20 minutes or less, and walkable or by bike, but obviously because people have cars, they might use them when maybe they can find other means. And it's also getting down to the really nitty gritty. It's also projected to save 27,000 tonnes of CO2 in 2023, which obviously will make a really big help for climate change, and projected to save 362,000 tonnes of nitrous dioxide in 2023. So a huge amount, and more than the initial inner London. And yeah, I ran through this briefly, but just why we need action in outer London. There has been a slow rate of reductions in nitrous dioxide emissions in outer London, despite ULEZ coming into place in central London. So this graph indicates where the most reductions have been, and they have obviously been concentrated in central and inner London. And more than 600,000 people in London have asthma. And 60% of them live in outer London, asthma and respiratory diseases. And so that's a huge percent of the population that will really, really benefit day to day from these reductions, and it will save hospital visits, as we've heard. So really important just on an intrinsic personal level. So just to clarify, ULEZ only targets the highest polluting vehicles. It's a really targeted initiative to get the vehicles that are doing the most damage off the road. On the average day, the majority of cars seen driving on the roads in outer London already meet the ULEZ standards. That's 9 out of 10 seen driving on the roads every day. So actually this won't affect a huge amount of people, but obviously understandable for the people that it does impact. There are clearly concerns that do need to be addressed. Most petrol vehicles under 16 years old or diesel vehicles under 6 years old meet these standards, and you can get checked. You can do so on TfL's website. Exemptions and grace periods are also in place, such as vehicles used for community transport, people on disability benefits, or people who are travelling to hospital, making hospital visits. And that's true for charities as well. So yeah, there are definitely exemptions in place. On top of that, support is available. London has provided a £110 million scrappage scheme, which is available for people who need to scrap or retrofit their vehicles in exchange for a grant or a fee, or a free annual bus and tram pass. The scrappage scheme recently, in the past couple of weeks, have expanded eligibility, and this will come into place in the end of July, I believe. Expanded its eligibility requirements to cover all Londoners on child benefit, which is, of course, a huge amount of Londoners and a huge amount of families. And now small businesses, which are up to 50 employees. Charities can now also scrap up to 3 vehicles instead of 1. So there has been, an expansion in the number of people who are eligible. I think there hasn't been a huge amount of take up so far. So obviously, if this affects someone that or if you can share that information with people, obviously that's the more people who need that and have claim it. It's obviously really, really important. But also, I think it's important to note that eligibility still really isn't enough, and there are obviously people who are slipping through the cracks even with that, in which case I think it's important to also call on the national government to introduce its own scrappage scheme for anyone who isn't yet covered, and scrappage schemes have been provided by the national government to many cities around the UK, including Birmingham. There are many more, but they've slipped my mind. But they haven't. The national government hasn't provided any extra scrappage for London, so that's definitely something that should be pursued, we think. And also just to point out that all revenue from the ultra low emission zone is reinvested in expanding green public transport, because as we say, I think the vision for everyone of London is a city where everyone can travel around accessibly easily in a way that they know isn't hurting themselves or any other people, and we can all, you know, travel around without fear for our health. For example, the Superloop bus routes that circle the entire capital will connect outer London town centres, and for people to get around, money from ULEZ is already being invested in that, and hopefully will make some of those daily trips easier for people in outer London. So yeah, to be clear, I think ULEZ is not about allowing polluting vehicles to continue polluting for a fee. It's about working to get this city to be cleaner, to make it easier for everyone to travel in a way that's greener, and so far it's working. So just to, I think one of the top lines here is that this is just an opportunity that we can't waste. Clearly, there are many other policies that can and should be brought to the table, but this is one that I think is receiving a lot of attention right now, duly, but that also I think we should support, and that we can use to kind of build momentum for other policies that are also really important. And there are also ways that we can kind of make sure that this is as equitable as possible. Londoners deserve to breathe clean air. That's something I think we can all agree upon, and we need bold action to reduce toxic air as soon as possible. This is just a step to building a better future, but sadly, yeah, if there isn't public support shown for it, it may be harder to get policies with even more far-reaching action over the line. So this is something, yeah, we think we can get behind in the sort of shorter term, but it's also something we can do collectively.
Thanks so much, Maddie. So we're really happy to answer any questions about any of the policies that we talked about at the end, but we hope that we can count on some of your support. Obviously, think about it, but we'd love your support for action on clean air. So there are lots of different ways that you can show that support for policies like ULEZ. And one of the quickest ways you can do that is to sign your name on our open letter. Basically, this letter says that we want to continue taking action on clean air. We want further action on it. And so we'd love for you to sign that. We will obviously send the link around to people afterwards. And obviously, if you can, once you've signed it, if you can share it with people on social media, friends and family, that would be amazing as well. One of the key things, and obviously you're here as a group tonight, but one of the things that's really important is talking to people about this in your community, and whether that's talking about ULEZ or just talking to people about air pollution, sharing that link for people to be able to check it themselves in their area. The main goal of our campaign is to make sure that Londoners know about the negative health impacts of high air pollution in London. There's a lot of different data that shows this, and obviously I think that link where you can check it yourself is really important, but sometimes the stats can be a little bit overwhelming to people. So one of the best ways that you can raise awareness and cut through that noise is to humanize the issue and kind of talk about personal stories and sharing that through trusted messengers. We obviously trust the people that we already know the most, so that makes you the best messenger for this important cause for anybody that you already know. Personal stories are really one of the most powerful tools that we have in our toolbox. I'm sure that you've all used them multiple times for talking about causes that you care about, because they can really bring otherwise abstract facts to life. So it's something that we really encourage everybody to do. A good personal story should be relatable, emotionally engaging, and whether that's, for example, a story about how air pollution affects a loved one's health. So it's always worth thinking through, has you or somebody in your life been impacted by this issue? Was there kind of a moment that you learned something new and it changed your mind? Your story can be about something really small and specific, or it can be about much bigger picture concerns for the long term. The main thing is just that it should be personal to you and why you care about reducing toxic air. Everybody has their own reasons for it. I just want to give a quick shout out again to our partners at Asthma Lung UK, who filmed this amazing video of different children talking about why air pollution matters to them on World Asthma Day. It was really powerful. So we'd love anybody who cares about this issue to share their story with us. We have a really quick form on our website where you can just share why you care about air pollution. does not have to be a perfectly polished thing. Just a short and heartfelt message can really go a long way. And if you know anybody who has a good story, we'd love it if you share the link with them too. I know for me, one of my parents has a neurodegenerative disease, and the more I learn about the impact that air pollution has on brain health, the more I get passionate about it. It's just, especially for people who come from lower income backgrounds, who might not have the best access always to healthcare and things like that. I just think it's so important that we take action on toxic air, and that's why I care about it. And once you've kind of developed that story, we're really encouraging people to try and use it to make change. So whether that's, again, talking with people in your everyday life, posting about it online, we've got a bunch of different volunteers who've made a big impact by kind of giving a quote to local media stories, participating in things like radio phone-ins. And you can also influence key decision makers by lobbying your local councillors and MPs. And we've got different groups doing this. So if you'd be interested in being involved with that, we'd love to get you plugged in. We've got a couple of different slides here on each of those activities. So if you're thinking about kind of talking to people in your community about this, some of the key things that we recommend doing are connecting on common ground, obviously making it personal and keeping it positive. I think something that's kind of on an issue like this that's really important, and some of the health impacts really are scary. We don't just want to fearmonger. We want to make sure that people know there are things that they can do to protect themselves and their loved ones and to make change. So even though there are scary stats to share, that's not what we'd recommend doing for the people in your life. We'd really definitely recommend keeping it positive and connecting on common ground. And I think if I were to ask you guys to send one key message, it would be the one that lets people check air pollution in their neighborhood. I think it's just really important to arm people with information. So if people want to spend a couple of minutes when you hang up on the webinar tonight to just kind of make sure a couple of people in your life check that link, that would be amazing. If you are active on social media and you'd like to share your story online, we'd absolutely love it if you would tag Clean Air Wins or use our hashtag. The key tips that we have for that are just talking how you'd usually talk on your platform. You've obviously got followers who've tuned in because they like how you tweet, or, you know, Facebook groups, next door, wherever you want to post. If you can, it's always great to include some eye-catching visuals or a link to find more information, for example, the address pollution one. And if you're active specifically on Twitter, we'd love it if you can drop your handle in the chat and we will add you to one of our Twitter DM groups where we've got supporters kind of sharing relevant content, different articles, stuff like that, so that everybody can be amplifying each other. So if you want to drop your handle in the chat, we'd love to add you to that if you're active on Twitter. And then, as we all know, obviously tomorrow is Clean Air Day, June 15th, and our friends over at Friends of the Earth have put together a really quick tool that lets you contact your local council leader to show support for policies like ULEZ. You just put in your name, your address, and it will figure out who your local council leader is. Super nifty. There's then a template in there that you can obviously edit as much as you'd like. So for example, if you're less comfortable talking specifically about ULEZ, but you want to urge your council leader to take different actions on clean air, you can still use the tool. And then you just press send and it will send it to your local council leader. It really could not be easier. It's amazing. And Friends of the Earth are pushing that out for a big collective action tomorrow on Clean Air Day. So you can get ahead of the game and do it tonight, or you can do it tomorrow on the day itself. We've also put together a quick volunteer toolkit. So it's got all of the different links that we have mentioned tonight, some more tips on kind of thinking about your story, quick actions you can take, and different resources. One of those resources is a big FAQ document about the ULEZ expansion that kind of addresses some of the key questions that keep coming up. So if you're kind of interested in reading that more, definitely check out our toolkit. We also have different trainings and events that are ongoing and will keep happening throughout the rest of the summer. So if you're interested in volunteering with us, we'd love to see you on another one of these. And I think I just wanted to also say before we wrap up, a big thank you to what Naomi put in the chat, which is anybody who's here from, I know we have someone from Leeds, but anybody who's here is not from London. I think one of the key things for us is thinking about London as kind of being one of the first cities that's doing this on a big scale. And we really want to have success here so that other cities around the UK will also be inspired to take action on air pollution. As you mentioned, person in Leeds, I'm sorry, I can't see your name in the chat anymore. But like air pollution is bad across the UK. So we want to make sure that we're taking action nationally as well. And London is just the first of many, we hope. So in terms of next steps for anybody who is interested in taking more action with us, just to recap, the 3 main asks that we have of you are firstly to sign the open letter for clean air, bonus points if you share it with your friends and family afterwards, then to share your story about why you care about air pollution, and lastly to use that Friends of the Earth tool to write to your councillor tomorrow on Clean Air Day. If you have other ideas for things that you'd like to do with the Clean Air Wins campaign, we'd absolutely love to hear from you. We're excited to get to work with all sorts of different groups across the city. If you're hosting an event, anything like that, please email us at team@cleanairwins.org.uk. We would really love to stay in touch and just see how we can be helpful. So with that, I just want to say a massive thank you. We really appreciate all of you spending your evening with us doing this. So I'll stop sharing my screen and pass it over to Rabbi Wittenberg, who will say a few words, and then afterwards we'd be really happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much. That was a brilliant presentation, and it's extremely compelling. And I did not know at all about the extent of the impact and the statistics that you've shared. And I hope many more people will watch the recording of this, because it's very important. Several things about AI went through my mind. Right at the beginning of the Hebrew Bible, we're told that God breathed into the human being the breath of life. And if air ceases to be the breath of life and becomes dangerous, something that's giving, the case with the young child and asthma, then we're not breathing, we're not doing God's will in enabling people to breathe the breath of life. We're making it into something very different. There's a comment by the mystics that whoever breathes out breathes from the very core of themselves. We have something divine in us, and that's life-giving, and that's something we need to be sharing. Through in my mind also went the resonance, as you used the phrase, of I can't breathe, and what a basic human right that is. And in my head, it's associated with the killing of George Floyd and the responses to that. But actually, it's much more basic, and it's much more prevalent, and it's much more all around us, and it applies to all of us, which is we may think we're breathing good air, but we may not be aware that we're actually not. And Judaism doesn't entitle us to be indifferent to things that ultimately cost lives. So I believe we have to act. There are, as you said right at the beginning, there are various ways in which to improve the air of our cities. I'm a passionately keen gardener, so I think London's green spaces are really important, but I'm horrified, I better not say this too loud, that our neighbours have destroyed their entire back garden to put down plastic grass and concrete. And some protection for the very suburban gardens are an extremely important habitat, and they're extremely important to keeping cities cool, as well as the quality of air. And protection in law taken seriously with bite for the green spaces of London, be they small, be they big, is really also very important. And then London is also a blue city as well as a green city with a lot of water spaces, but the quality of the exercise of authority over our water resources needs political and local attention. The southeast of England is now considered a regular drought zone, and I think that is another facet of having breathable, livable cities. But I want to come back to something which the second I heard about some of the challenges has gone through my mind. In looking towards a cleaner, greener future and trying to keep temperature rises somewhere between 1.5 and 2%, we have to face tough decisions. And in facing those tough decisions, there are unpopular things which is difficult to say. And there'll also be things which are very important, but there will be groups of people for whom it would be very hard. So particularly important in your talk was to hear about the exemptions, to hear about the grants to retrofit and for scrappage, and that community transport will have certain exemptions. And I wonder whether we as communities can and should, together with Eco Church and Eco Mosque and other such organizations, think, how can we help our congregants? How can we make transport to community events more communal? And how can we how can we support people to be able to meet a measure that is really necessary and essential. I'm aware of other difficult messages to give about limiting flying, meat eating, diet, and so on. And that question of how we take people with us in what may have short-term difficulties, but are huge long-term benefits for humanity is one that's very, very much in my mind. And you raised that. This is a kind of very significant test case for trying to do that well. Those are some of my thoughts. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Couldn't have put it better myself. Thank you so much for that. If people do have questions, please either feel free to unmute yourself, put them in the chat, however people feel most comfortable asking. I think Naomi was doing an amazing job in the chat, but if anybody put anything in there throughout the talk, please feel free to raise it again. Yes, so with your hand up, please go ahead and unmute.
Yeah, I'm Donna Combe from Eco-Judaism. How do we counter the argument that it's just a money spinner on the part of Sadiq Khan?
It's a great question. And unfortunately, I think it's something that has kind of gotten out of control a little bit as a narrative. I think the key things, one, as we mentioned in the talk, all of the money is being reinvested in public transport in outer London. So all of that money, like legally, can't be used for anything other than that. The second thing is that as ULEZ becomes more effective, I think there's a study out right now that it will probably stop making money by 2027 as more and more cars become more compliant. So if it were a money-making scam, it would be a very ineffective one, to be honest with you, because as more cars become compliant, which the data has shown happens, it stops making so much money. So given the fact that all the money is reinvested in public transport and it won't keep making money past about 2027 as more cars get compliant, I think those are the two key arguments that it's not about making money, because it just wouldn't be a very effective scheme to do that ultimately.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's a great question. Mr. Briskman, I see you've had your hand up.
Yes, I did. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. First of all, I'm 100% in agreement that there's a need to reduce air pollution, but I can think of quite a lot of measures other than ULEZ. I mean, one of the issues is that a lot of stop-starts that are taking place in cars in congested areas. For example, parking in high streets where people are constantly reversing into a space, causing perhaps 20 to 30 cars behind them to stop. You mentioned idling, where there are people booking people for parking. The same people could book people for having the engine running for more than a minute. All these things are not happening. The other thing that aggrieves me is reading the newspapers, Sunday Times, for example, where they compare a Maserati with a Lamborghini, and you look at the pollution level of these cars. They may be brand new, they may comply, but they are running at 15 miles per gallon with the associated pollution. And why are these cars being sold at all? When you buy a washing machine or a tumble dryer, it's got to meet the latest energy regulations, and yet cars, you can use anything you like. However, the thing I really want to ask about is the ULEZ, because I've read the report that was published, which is probably the same report that you read to produce your figures. And I get the impression that the figures that are produced by that report will not stand up to scientific scrutiny. They're based on the mistaken assumption that if A happens and B happens, therefore B is a result of A. And you have to actually prove cause and effect, and they haven't done that. What I would like to see, and I don't know if you've got the answer, is if we take away all the cars which do not comply, and the mileage they do, the mileage is important because I suspect they're older cars and they do less mileages. If we take them all out and replace them by cars that do comply, doing the same mileage, how much are we going to save as a total percentage in reduction in pollution? I suspect very little. But those figures are not there, and I suspect they're not there because the whole thing has become a political issue, and the mayor of London is trying to put figures to justify his actions rather than the other way around. So if you've got scientific figures, in other words, take all the cars that pollute out, do the same mileage with other cars, what is the percentage reduction?
Great questions and some really great points. I will say in terms of having that exact percentage on hand, I'm afraid I don't have that. We can send around afterwards. There's a really great graphic that I should have put on the slides that's about specifically diesel cars, how much the standards have changed in past years and how much older diesel cars, the amount that they pollute versus the newer ones. I think basically the highest polluting vehicles that are on the roads really are just a lot more harmful than cars that do meet the standards. I don't have an exact percentage about if you just had everybody swap to a slightly newer car that does meet the standards. I don't have the exact stats about the exact impact that would have, but it would have an impact because the oldest, most highest polluting vehicles really are the ones doing the most damage in terms of the amount that they pollute. So it would have an impact. I think to some of your earlier comments, I think you're absolutely right that there are lots of policies that can help reduce toxic air. And this shouldn't be the only one that we're doing, of course. And I think there are definitely lots of people who'd say that things like the ULEZ should be going further because, as you said, there are some newer cars that technically meet the standards that are still polluting a lot. I think one of the things that's encouraging about ULEZ is that it has shown that some people are switching away from cars when they make the switch. So one of the stats was just about there are a lot fewer car trips generally. So a lot of people are switching to things like public transport, active travel, or as the rabbi mentioned, kind of more community modes of traveling, whether that's carpooling together, just trying to reduce the number of car trips overall. But as you said, there's a lot more that can be done. I think the key thing is, like you said, you would support action on toxic air. This is an action that can be taken right now on toxic air. And we want to make sure that there's good public support that encourages politicians from whichever party to realize the public wants action on this and they should keep doing actions on this. We're worried that if people kind of are like, oh, we don't want to do this action on toxic air, politicians will be less incentivized to keep pushing further bold actions. Naomi, I saw you had your hand up at one point, so if you want to add anything to what I said, please feel free.
Yes, I just wanted to thank Mr. Briskman for his very thoughtful and clearly very well informed question. And I wanted to ask Maddie, I believe you're clued up on this, but could you perhaps tell the group, because I know Mr. Briskman, you had your concerns that the studies that have created these, that have produced our understanding of the ultra low emission zones effects and potential to create effect are non-scientific, but in fact they have come from peer-reviewed academic studies. Maddie, do you have the name of the university that produced the studies? I can't remember off the top of my head if it was London School of Economics or Imperial College.
It was Imperial College.
And it was Imperial College.
There are certainly different universities that tend to work with like the Greater London Authority and things, but they're independent, and obviously in the next few years there'll be much more evidence about like long-term health effects of ULEZ, which take into consideration and can kind of control for a variety of factors, because of course one of the big things is people are saying, how much has a policy like ULEZ or any number of policies, how much have they reduced X, Y, and Z, given that the pandemic happened and there's lockdown. But of course, studies done by universities have ways of controlling for those factors, and just the more research that's done, the more base we will have. So certainly, like, it's fantastic that you've been doing your reading, and I just encourage you to keep reading, and I will do the same. But yeah, Imperial College London has certainly done a lot.
I'll add one final detail on that, which is just earlier, I think last week, a group of scientists from across the UK came together to write a letter asking the national government to make sure that people weren't undermining some of the studies done on toxic air, because it's just so important. So we can send that link around afterwards. It's got scientists from all different parts of the UK who've done different types of work on this. So there's definitely strength in numbers there. Any other questions from other people? Helen, go for it. Oh, sorry, Helen, I think you're muted.
Thank you. It's not a question really, it was just to say thank you to Maddie and also to yourself for that reassurance, because I was quite, I was thinking when we were asked what can we do to tell people it's not just about the money, and you gave them some good reasons, things to say, but also I would have thought or just give them the benefits that we've seen from already, which you quoted. And then for Mr. Briscoe to say that actually it's rubbish, I was thinking, oh dear, that's really bad. So I don't know enough about this, but it's good to know that you do feel that these stats are worth mentioning. And surely saying something positive like that is maybe better than trying to persuade people, oh, it's not really a money spinner because of, you know, it's only for a few years, or it's all being put back into green transport. They could still say, oh yes, but then, you know, it's just taking from one pot, put it into another pot, and things like that. People who are getting worried about the finances. And surely what actually would make people see it as a good thing was to say, but look at these statistics, you can see there's less asthma and there's less hospital admissions and all these things. That's the sort of thing I'd have thought would make people stand up and pay attention.
Absolutely, Ellen. And what I'm hearing is you'd be a great person to talk to your friends and family about this. I think you're exactly right that staying positive and showing that it's an effective policy that's worked and that it's going to bring benefits to literally everybody across London, because it means we'll all be breathing cleaner air, our kids, our parents, everybody. I absolutely think it's important to stay positive. So thank you. Yes, let's go with what you said.
I'm definitely going to get in touch with my council and say, oh, we want this here in Leeds.
Amazing. Andrea, pass it back to you.
I just had a question. So in my other job, I deal with a lot of building contractors, and talking to them over the course of last week since I met you, their concern is that they're small businesses, their van is their livelihood, their tools are in their van, that's how they get to job. And they say that the scrappage scheme isn't going to cover the costs for them to replace what they already have, and the additional costs, obviously, of ULEZ when it comes in. What would I say to them?
It's a great question. I think one of the things, because the scrappage eligibility was expanded literally just a couple of weeks ago, it used to be businesses only up to 10 employees and now 50 employees. So it's worth just always double checking that they've checked whether they are now eligible, because all small businesses up to 50 employees across London now are eligible for scrappage. I think obviously to the point that scrappage isn't enough to get a new van, I think this is one where we really do call on the national government to step in, as they have for other cities, as Maddie mentioned, across the UK. We think there should be more support for people, especially in businesses. But I'd also point to some of the really inspiring stories that are coming from small businesses that have switched to things like cargo bikes. I think Naomi was just putting one in the chat. There have been some excellent stories from people like plumbers, electricians, all across the city who are switching, because actually cargo bikes, you don't have to wait in traffic. They're a lot quicker for people to get around, and some businesses have found they really work. But Naomi, I will pass it over to you. I know you've been talking more with businesses recently about this, so if you have anything else you want to add, please do.
Absolutely, Hester, you covered that beautifully, but just to expand on it, because in a previous life, not too long ago, just before this campaign, I actually worked specifically in zero emission freight, which includes vehicles such as vans that are, employed in the construction business. And you're quite right, Andrea, that it is a concern. Obviously, we want to support a thriving city, and that includes people thriving in their jobs, in jobs that they love, and jobs that they've had for a long time. And they should be supported in those roles to live in and work in a way that does not cause toxic air in our city. That has to be our priority. I would reiterate what Hester was saying, that we need to call on the national government for greater support. But what can we tell people right here, right now? I would say, as Hester said, absolutely for them to please double check whether or not they are eligible, to look at examples such as the one I posted in the chat just now, which is a company called The Cycling Sparks. If you may have heard of the slang term Sparkies for electricians, well, these are the cycling Sparkies who are getting their business as electricians completed via cargo bikes, which are these kind of bicycle contraptions with either a very large wagon, I guess you could call it, at the front or at the back. Obviously, that won't be suitable for every vehicle, but what we are seeing is a really, really fast uptake of the availability of zero-emission vehicles, such as electric vehicles and hydrogen vehicles on the market. Now, those vehicles will you will never have to pay the ULEZ fee. So if there is a possibility for them to look into those kinds of vehicles, I think that is always an option, but really would urge in the first instance to check availability for the scrappage scheme. And then if they feel empowered to do so, if they have learned about some of these issues, I would urge them to ask their councillors why they're not pushing for more support at a local level and at a national level, because this is something we've seen, particularly in this run up to Clean Air Day, that there is national passion and energy behind this, that we need to have the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, thinking seriously about these concerns, because these are genuine health concerns that affect, from cradle to grave, head to toe, but also have a significant impact on people's working lives, and people must be supported to do their bit for the planet, which I think we all agree on here. So I guess the top line message is, Andrea, because you need to have this conversation. Number one, double check if they're available given the newly expanded scrappage scheme, because I don't think that message got out there enough that the scrappage scheme has been extended. Number two, can they think creatively about how they do their work? Would it be possible to perhaps look into a smaller vehicle such as a cargo bike for some of their works, obviously not the largest ones? And thirdly, can this be something that they get energized behind, and they can start to speak to maybe their local councillors, their local MPs, and perhaps any other organizations they're part of? I will say the larger organizations, household names that you'll all be aware of, such as IKEA, M&S, Royal Mail, a lot of these companies now have zero emission vehicles and are really proud to have zero emission vehicles and be pushing towards a clean air future. So I'm really hopeful that business will actually start to lead the way, not least because having poor air quality leads to economic losses through ill health at work. So there's a world in which business is on our side and gets us there even quicker than we're going now. But I think we have to recognize that this is also an emotional conversation, particularly for people who feel their livelihoods are threatened. And so we have to, I think, go into those conversations with compassion and understanding that maybe they feel a bit uncomfortable having them, or a bit threatened having those conversations. But check the scrappage scheme. That's my number one line. And then number two, see if you can't find some energy to put your political heft behind it. I hope that was clear.
I'd also just add one thing that I put in the chat, which is actually the majority of vans already are compliant. I think a lot of small businesses think that every van has to pay, and that's not true. Most vans are already compliant. But if there are no other questions, I'll pass it back to Andrea.
So I'd like to say a huge thank you to Hester and to Naomi and to Maddie from the Clean Air Wins team. I think we all learned a lot. I think there were things that we thought we knew that we didn't really know enough about. And there are there's things there that we need to take on board. And I think it's incumbent upon us, as Rabbi Wittenberg has said, for us to acknowledge that we can't shy away from difficult questions, and that this is something that, clean air is a human right. I would also like to urge, I think the one thing that I took away from this is that people need to check their vehicles, because people could be worrying that they aren't ULEZ compliant when actually they are. So that's something else, something I've taken away. So thank you, Rabbi Wittenberg, for joining us and for your words. And thank you for everybody for joining us tonight. And especially thanks to you, Hester, for a brilliant presentation, and to the rest of the team. So thank you and good night, everyone.
Thanks so much, everybody. Have a good evening.
Right.
Thank you
all. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I really, really learnt a lot. Thank you very, very, very much for all your time and all your effort and your passion for this important matter. Thank you.
Thank
You're
you.
most welcome. Thank you.
Bye-bye.